Hey everyone, it's Peter Kerr from Rock Daydream Nation, and today I'm doing a special show to talk about our favourite concept albums. So I've got an esteemed panel of guests. I've got Armando Venditti from the Sea of Tranquility and the Contrarians. I've got Bicyclelegs from the Bicyclelegs channel and the Contrarians. Peter Wicks from Wixxyleaks, and John the Music Nut with thousands of shows. How are you guys?
Yeah, good. Doing great.
Doing good.
Fantastic. Fantastic. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick first round our favorite concept album. We're going to talk about why it's our favorite concept album. And then we might do a round of an honorable mention with our second favorite concept album. So I think I will start off with you, Mr. Venditti. Armando Venditti. So tell us, what is your favorite concept album and why? And yeah, take it away.
I'm not used to going first. It's a new thing for me, Peter. Thank you so much. Well, after careful consideration, my favorite concept album is Pink Floyd's The Wall. And I will tell you why it's my favorite concept album. Just a little bit of background on it. The story goes is the band were performing, Pink Floyd were performing in Montreal at the Stadium Olympique on the Animals tour. And by this point, Roger Waters was getting disillusioned with the whole idea of the music business, what it entailed, etc. And a big surprise. Anyways, there was a point where he wanted the audience to just sit there and listen to the music and not react or just really get into what they were trying to present to them. At one point, one of the fans tried to get to the front of the stage, and Waters literally walked up to him and spat in his face. And at that point, they finished the show, but Waters became completely depressed and frustrated with the entire situation. And about a couple of months later, he started working on demos that would become The Wall. Now, I've had a bit of history with this album. The story of the album, for those who don't know, and if you've been living in the cave for the past 30 years, it's the story of a disillusioned rock star who becomes disenchanted with the world around him, with his fans, with his life, with his entire being, basically. And he basically slowly starts to build up a wall around him to keep himself away from people, away from human contact, away from his fans, his family, etc. And the fallout that happens with regards to said wall being put in place. For me, the reason why I think this is the perfect concept album is because, in my very humble opinion, it has everything. It has drama, levity in certain spots. It's a very atmospheric piece of music. It's a double album, 26 tracks, 13 tracks per disc. It goes from very hard driving music to very soft acoustic symphonic pieces on the side 3, back to the hard driving rock that Pink Floyd were known for. Some experimentation went on with production of the album. David Gilmour has said that this album lacks how do you put it? It lacks soul for him. In the end, he really did not like side 3, because side 3 has songs like Vera Lynn and Bring the Boys Back Home and Is There Anybody Out There, which were more of the acoustic symphonic pieces. It's been stated that by some people that this album would have been better if it was a single album. But in my mind, where would you cut it? What songs would you cut out? It tells a complete story. So, and I'd like to hear from people in the comments. What pieces would you cut out, or could you cut out successfully to make it a cohesive running single album? I don't think you can. I just, from top to bottom, I think it's a perfect piece of work. It does not suffer on any level. In my very humble opinion, I used to sit and listen to this album cover to cover, and just I would always lose myself in the album itself. It took me away on a journey, from and from the word go, and I just think that Pink Floyd were never able to top it. And just a little footnote, when Roger Waters presented this, by this point, Waters' dominance over the band was concrete. I mean, at this point, Richard Wright was basically forced out of the band because for the last couple of years, previous to this, Waters believed that he didn't contribute any music at all, any musical ideas had any validity whatsoever, and Wright just basically let him take over. I was going to say, Waters presented this idea to the band and also ideas for the pros and cons of hitchhiking. And he had them choose which one they wanted to do. So they chose The Wall over Pros and Cons. I think they made the right choice. So I mean, it's, for me, it's a no-brainer in terms of choices.
And one quick question to you, Armando. Two favorite songs off the album, straight off the bat.
Oh, sweet Jesus. Mother.
I know that one. Is that on there?
Mother and Run Like Hell.
Nice. Okay. Very good. I'll throw to you, Bicyclelegs. What's your favorite concept album, or the one that you want to put forward in this show?
Yeah. Well, the T-shirt may suggest that I was also going to pick a Pink Floyd album, but that is classic misdirection. The album I'm going to go for is Brave by Marillion. This is the third album that they did with Steve Hogarth as lead vocalist after Fish left after the first four albums. Now, they did a couple of concept albums with Fish, Misplaced Childhood and Clutching at Straws. And they're both excellent albums too. I could have easily picked either one of those as well. But this one is my favorite of those. And it's probably my favorite concept album because I think the concept itself is so strong, and also the music that goes with it is just so incredibly strong and moving and touching. It's like Armando was saying with The Wall. This, for me, is a deeply emotionally affecting album. The concept of this one was that they had heard a story on the radio about a teenage girl who had been found wandering on this bridge that goes between England and Wales. And she was taken in by the police, and she either couldn't or wouldn't tell them anything, like not even her name. So they had no idea what she was doing on the bridge, why she was there. And the concept of the album is trying to sort of fictionally fill in those details of what led her to be on that bridge that particular day. And it goes through sort of a really tragic life that this young girl had been through. Sort of emotionally unavailable parents, abusive boyfriends, you know, getting involved with drugs and all that sort of thing. And just the music that goes with it is just so gorgeous and touching. And sometimes it's heavy rocking, sometimes it's really beautiful and atmospheric. On the title track, Brave, they use some elan pipes, Irish elan pipes that just sound absolutely gorgeous and eerie and give it a real sort of beautiful atmosphere. But the album's really touching. And then just as a beautiful end to the album, side 4, it's a double album. Side 4 actually has a double groove to it. So it has 2 tracks, and depending where you land the needle, you will get one or the other track. And they basically are 2 different endings to the story. One where she jumps and one where she doesn't.
Jeez.
It's just an incredible album. And for the people out there who are sort of Fish only Marillion people, I would say this album is one of my favorite Marillion albums of all time. And they could never, ever have done this album with Fish. I just don't think he would have been right for it vocally. And I don't think he would have been the right man to write those lyrics either. Steve Hogarth, his vocals on this album are just absolutely breathtaking and stunning. He's one of these people, like, there's 2 or 3 singers that I could listen to them sing pretty much anything. I wouldn't care if they were singing the phone book, you know. I would just want to hear their vocal tones. And Steve Hogarth is one of those for me. He's just got the most gorgeous voice. And, you know, there's sort of themes on here of, as I say, abuse and depression. And in the happy ending, she sort of breaks through that and gets through it. And that one ends with a song called Made Again, which just, that song breaks my heart every single time I hear it. So yeah, that's my pick, is Brave by Marillion.
Well done, mate. On the basis of that, I think I'll purchase that album. It's pretty compelling.
It's a good
pretty
album.
compelling sell.
It's an incredible album.
It is. It's good.
Look, my familiarity of Marillion is Misplaced Childhood. And I actually played that first time in about 20, 30 years at Christmas time. And it was great listening to it again. So I'll definitely get into the wheelhouse of Marillion. But no, that's a really nice take on that album. And a really interesting story, because let's face it, there are some concept albums. The concept is an idea, a sentence. It can be really flimsy. You could write it on a Post-it note. But that one sounds like it's a bit more meat on the bone, so to speak. There's a bit more of a detailed story. And it's going to be really interesting as we go through all our picks to see what the concept is. Is it really detailed or is it a loose idea? So well done.
Yeah, well, that'll probably come up when I go with my second one, when we go around the second time, because that one is much more a sort of, there's a theme to the album, but the songs are individual songs, as it were.
Yes, bit loose.
Yeah.
Rightio. Thank you. John the Music Nut, welcome. What's your pick for your concept album?
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. Oh, I was bouncing between the 2 that I was going to talk about, but I'm going to talk about the one I have more experience with, and to this day still brings me a lot of joy. I mean, it was great revisiting this album this week. And this was an album I discovered in 1989 after I saw them live. And I was a bit of a fan of this band until I saw them live on this tour. And that night I became a fan. And the name of the band is Queensryche, and the album is Operation Mindcrime. This was their third LP. This came out in May of 1988. And Jeff Tate had come up with the concept. He's their lead singer. And back then he was a force of nature as a singer. And his idea was he wanted to do an album about someone who was disillusioned with the world and the corruption of the world in particular, and which during that time there was a lot of corrupt. I mean, there still is, but I mean, in the 1980s, 1988, during the Reagan administration in the United States, there was a lot of corruption going on, difference between the haves and the have-nots and things like that. And he wanted to write about someone who was fed up with it and wanted to do something about it. Not the best thing to do about it, but I'll get into that a little bit. So he went to the rest of the band members one by one, said, look, I want to make an album like this. And, you know, they all agreed on it. And not only was this a critical masterpiece for them, it became a commercial masterpiece as well, because this album is the protagonist would be Nicky, who was a heroin addict, and he got under the influence of Dr. X, who wanted to take down the corrupt leaders of the world, assassinate them, more or less. And as the album goes on, the songs are what really bring you in, the music itself. But if you really listen to the lyrics, it's talking about things that he's going through. Revolution calling. It's about the revolution they want to start. Operation Mindcrime. Dr. X says the word Mindcrime, and then Nicky will go and perform his deeds. There's also a woman named Mary that's brought into the fold too, and Mary's introduced by Dr. X to Nicky to pleasure him, and that gets into this storyline as well. Eventually Mary dies, and then Nicky goes off the deep end and gets big into heroin again, and all the lyrics talk about that. Sweet Sister Mary is a fantastic epic. It's 11 minutes long. Wonderful song. Is very drawn out. But if you go through the songs themselves, I mean, this was where they really hit on AOR radio too, with the songs Revolution Calling and Eyes of a Stranger and I Don't Believe in Love and Break into Silence as well. I mean, there are little snippets in between. There's 10 actual songs and then 5 little snippets, but it flows perfectly. It doesn't take away from the listening experience at all. And if anything, it enhances the experience. This was produced by Peter Collins. The production is immaculate. Wonderful. I especially like the way the drums are mixed on this album. It's such a great, strong drum sound at a time when the drums would be kind of tinny on some albums back then. But Jeff Tate, fantastic vocally here. The lyrics are spectacular. The songs are all great. I mean, the deep cuts are awesome. Speak is a really driving song. The Mission is more cerebral and more mid-tempo. The Needle Lies is a fast-paced track. The bigger song, more popular songs are on the latter half of the album. Eyes of a Stranger, the band still plays to this day live. They actually touch on a lot of songs on this album live to this day. But Jeff Tate is the only one who has the right to do the album in its entirety. And they went to court over that. He's performed the album in its entirety. And I've seen it with his band, and it's pretty amazing. But this is Operation Mindcrime, 1988. Nice. And they did come out with a sequel, and I've still not I never bought the album. I've listened to it, I've never really been able to quite get into it. It's not quite on that level, but this would go platinum in the States. It was one of those slow burn albums. It only charted at number 50, but through word of mouth and touring. And when I saw them, they opened for Metallica. They eventually would go platinum with this album, and this would lead into Empire, which would become their biggest album and give them their biggest radio hits like Silent Lucidity and Jet City Woman. Thanks.
Nice. Look, I like that album a hell of a lot. I think that they actually planted the seeds for this album sonically through the previous album, which is Rage for Order, which is my personal favorite of Queensryche. But that was Operation Mindcrime was a huge hit. And I think Empire is less interesting. Empire was really when they were getting into that Def Leppard sound. It was a sound, very commercial. And I think probably Operation Mindcrime was when the last album that Queensryche were truly interesting, to my ears at least. But
I would agree. I would agree.
And there's a whole little subset about in this show about sequels to concept albums, because I'm scratching my head. There's not really one sequel to a concept album that I think's any much top. I don't know what you gents think. That Operation Mindcrime too wasn't very good.
Yeah, it had its moments, but it didn't really bring you in at all. I mean, you just keep going back to the first one. You're like, and I think at the time when they put that album out, they were looking for a spark because their albums weren't selling well, and they weren't the same band musically. They were following trends, and so their albums were kind of hit and miss. So I think they were trying to get lightning to strike twice. And,
it doesn't really happen.
Yeah, that always works, doesn't it?
Right, thanks, John. Throw to you, Peter Wicks. What do you got?
Okay, mine's from 1998, and I've noticed that the albums we've had so far all touch on dark themes. So mine sort of continues along dark themes. Mine's Electroshock Blues by the Eels, and it doesn't get much darker than this. It's pretty much the album is basically about the death of his family members. So it doesn't get much more personal or dark than that. It starts off with a track called Elizabeth on the Bathroom Floor, which is basically about his sister's suicide and like what he perceives her thoughts were while she was basically lying on the floor dying. So it's this was a follow-up to Beautiful Freak, and it's interesting when you read his book. It's Beautiful Freak was a hit. It had Susan's House and Nova Came for the Soul. Electroshock Blues didn't really have a single like that. There was Cancer for the Cure, which they just didn't have a hit single on it like Nova Came for the Soul. And but it was funny. He said when they took this album said here it is to the record company, and the record company were like, great, didn't question it, just said this is brilliant, chucked it out, and it didn't really go anywhere. And the Daisies for the Galaxy, which was the next one, which was their biggest album ever, the record company was iffy about that one. So it's quite funny. But anyway, it's like I said, it's a dark album. It's all about the death of his family. A lot of them died at around the same time. It goes a lot into the relationship with his father, which was a strange relationship at best. So yeah, anyway. But musically, it's not as it's certainly not as upbeat as Daisies for the Galaxy, and it doesn't have the same grungy type feel to it as Beautiful Freak does in a lot of the tracks. But they're just fantastic tracks. One of the tracks that I think is really interesting is one called Evil's God, and the way it's pronounced in the song is it's pronounced It Feels Good, but it's actually called Evil's God. And when you listen to the music has a funny sound to it. It just sounds odd, and that's because it's another track that they previously recorded called Dog's Life, played backwards. And if you spell Dog's Life backwards, it's Evil's God, which is how the song came about. It's just little quirks like that, which I think makes it a little bit different. The last two tracks, I think, are probably two of the best tracks that ever gone back to back. The Medication's Wearing Off and P.S. You Rock My World. And that's one of the things I really like about this album is it's dark and it's gloomy, and it finishes off with optimism with P.S. You Rock My World. It's still a dark song, but it's an optimistic finish to a pretty dark album. But one of my favourite albums ever. Electroshock Blues. If you haven't got it, get it.
Nice. Oh, well, bit of a theme going here, isn't it? All very cheery.
It's very cheery.
It's going to get even more cheerful.
Oh, dear. On. Second round. I can't wait for that. All right. I'll try to lighten things up a little bit. This is a 1984 album, which I love. And I would say that the concept storyline is a little bit thin. I'm not going to go into it. It's a little bit convoluted. But the storyline for this album is about the supernatural, the occult, and anything remotely scary, and a lot of songs that just hang on that premise. And I'm talking about Phenomena. So I don't know if you gents are aware of this album. This was produced or written by Tom Galley, who's the brother of Mel Galley, who you may be aware from a band called Trapeze and Whitesnake of the Slide It In era. And it's like a who's who of English rock. You've got Glenn Hughes, who sings on every single track. Cozy Powell does the drums. Neil Murray on bass. Yeah, you're hearing a bit of a Whitesnake connection here, Saints and Sinners lineup.
Just a bit of one, yes.
Richard Bailey on keyboards. He does a lot of the writes the music. He was in Magnum and Alaska. And you've also got Don Airey and Ted McKenna. And also backing vocals, Peter Green from Fleetwood Mac, which I found quite interesting. So this was on the Bronze label, which was the Motorhead label. The album, the Bronze label went into bankruptcy around 84, 85, 86, and this sank without a trace, but it should have done much better. Here's the booklet, and it's got all these, lyrics and interesting sort of photographs and drawings of the supernatural. How would I describe it? It's very synthy. So around 84, everyone was getting into the Fairlight synthesizer. It's got these beautiful, tasty synth lines. It's very atmospheric. It's very moving. And in my opinion, it's got some of the best vocals that Glenn Hughes has ever committed to vinyl. I mean, Glenn Hughes has sung on a lot of different albums. And you've got to remember, around 84, 85, he was really in his drug phase. He was heavily into cocaine. And to get him into the studio and belt out the vocals on these songs is quite an achievement. But I've never heard him sing better than this album. It's got crunchy guitar. It's got great synth lines. It may be like of the period, but I love it. And I've always found it quite moving and haunting. So the key tracks are Kiss of Fire, Still the Night, which Glenn Hughes likes this song so much he's recorded it 4 or 5 times, not to be confused with Still of the Night, Dance with the Devil, Believe, Who's Watching Who, and Hell on Wheels. So I've got a couple of versions of this album. It's apparently sold 1 million copies worldwide, which is a bit of a head scratch. And it's only just been released on HD Blu-ray. So there's a bit of a market for that. I've got to get that. And I'll send you the link, Armando, because I know you like purchasing stuff like this. I think this is right up your This is right up your wheelhouse, Armando. I think you'd like this album.
Peter.
I love this album. It's, as I said, it's a concept album just on the concept of supernatural. And if you love your heavy 80s synth washes with great melodies and crunchy guitars with, basically the bottom end of Whitesnake, this is the album for you, Phenomena 1984. All righty. So let's go back for our honourable mentions. Armando, quickly, what's your honourable mention for your second pick?
Excuse me. My honourable mention, can you never say that word? My honorable mention is from Dream Theater, from an album called Metropolis Part 2, Scenes from a Memory.
Oh, great album.
Yes, it is actually. It's quite dense. It came out on Elektra Records in 1999. Concept album, story of Nicholas and Victoria. The character of Nicholas very quickly starts having dreams about this woman named Victoria who comes to him in his dreams, and she asks him to help her find out who murdered her. So he basically goes to therapy, starts talking to a psychiatrist about what is going on, and the story unravels that comes out that how can I put this? Nicholas and Victoria are one of the same. Nicholas is Victoria reincarnated. Victoria had an affair with someone by the name of left her husband Julian for for his brother named Edward. They had an affair. Then she decided to go back to Julian. The story is in the papers was that it was a murder-suicide, that Julian murdered Victoria in a rage and then killed himself. It's not the case. Through talking with the therapist starts to realize that Nicholas is putting together what actually happened back in the original story. The therapist is Edward reincarnated. Turns out Edward meets up with Julian and Victoria and murders them. The jilted lover kills both Victoria and Julian and gets away with it until he realizes Nicholas is figuring out what the hell happened. He has to take care of the situation. So, and for me, this story is very personal because my sister was murdered by her husband in 2002 because she wanted to leave him. And my sister, after she was murdered, for the next, I'd say about 5 to 7 years, was coming to me in my dreams.
Mm.
So this story hits home on a very personal level. But aside from that, the music is amazing. John Petrucci's playing on this album and Jordan Rudess's playing on this album are spectacular, bar none. Please, if you guys want to get a copy of it, or anyone watching, please invest your money in this. You will not be disappointed. There are 12 tracks. The album runs about 76, 77 minutes. Top to bottom, perfect. You won't even be able to skip a track. So.
Thanks, Armando, and thank you for sharing that. And really appreciate that. And I'm not familiar with that album, and I'll definitely track that down. But yeah, thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
Rightio, Bicyclelegs.
Yeah.
What's your second pick?
Okay. I'll very quickly throw out a couple of others. By the way, I believe, Armando, that was Jordan Rudess's very first album with Dream Theater, wasn't it?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'll throw out a couple. When you were talking about your Phenomena album, Peter, it made me think of one that I wish I'd pulled out, which is similar in its like sort of an all-star British rock kind of concept album, and that is The Butterfly Ball and the Grasshopper's Feast by Roger Glover and Friends. I adore that album.
Ronnie James Dio.
Yeah, he sings some beautiful stuff on that, doesn't he?
Yeah.
The other one I'll very quickly mention is probably my favorite, Spock's Beard, Snow. probably my favorite sort of rock opera, as it were. Just great. But the album that I really want to talk about is one where I was saying earlier when I was talking about my main pick, sort of an album where they're individual songs, but they're all on a sort of connected theme, as it were. And it's an album that I've actually done a show on my channel. So please do go and check that out if you get an opportunity.
Free plug there.
And that is The Age of Plastic by Boggles.
Nice.
You know, the theme of the album is sort of a slightly dystopian, not too distant future. But the songs are all individual stories based on that sort of idea of this sort of dystopian, not too distant future. You know, I mean, obviously the song everyone knows on this is Video Killed the Radio Star.
Yeah.
By no means is that the best song on this album. I love that song, but there's so many other better songs on this album as far as I'm concerned. The song Living in the Plastic Age, absolutely wonderful, very witty song. Kind of light-hearted look at this not too distant future. Kid Dynamo, sort of an adventure song, as it were. I Love You, Miss Robot is almost sort of like a song, sort of a phone sex song to artificial intelligence, as it were. And then you've got Elstree, which has sort of this kind of person who is in the future, but looking back at the past of the film industry in the UK and that sort of thing. It's just a really great album. It's not a progressive album. I mean, these guys would obviously go on and do the drama album with Yes, and be absolutely wonderful with that. That's one of my favorite Yes albums, probably a top 5 Yes album for me. This album, though, if you're into that drama album, go and check this album out. And its sequel. Oh, well, it's not a sequel, but there was a second Buggles album too. But yeah, that's my pick, Age of Plastic, Buggles.
Well, two things. Trevor Horn in my books cannot do no wrong. He's a genius. He's my favorite record producer of the 80s. Love him. And a little bit of trivia. Trevor Horn has wheeled out the Buggles and they're doing a tour supporting Seal in America.
Oh, so there you go.
I don't know. Really? Hopefully it's in your parts, Armando and John the Music Nut.
Really?
I'd pay money to see that. I wouldn't see Seal, but I'd see the Buggles.
No, I'd see both. Yeah.
I'd see both.
Yeah, there you go.
I'd see both. His production on the Seal albums.
But he's got that sort of stamp on it, isn't it? Just that symphonic wall of sound.
Yeah. He does have a trademark in terms of his production style.
Yeah. Thanks, Bicyclelegs. That's a goodie. John the Music Nut. What have you got?
Okay. It's one of my favorite artists. And it bounces between this album and New York. Bounce amongst my favorite albums by Lou Reed. And this is Berlin.
Oh.
Yes, nice.
Thank you. Okay, this is from 1973. Now, this was recorded after Lou Reed hit it big with the Transformer album, which was produced by David Bowie. Mm-hmm. That album was more of a glam rock album. You had some classic Lou Reed in there. Walk on the Wild Side's the big hit that most people know, but Perfect Day was an amazing song. It's been covered by many artists. You had Satellite of Love, which was a wonderful song. You had Vicious and New York Conversation. So he tastes the sweet taste of success, so to speak, and he does a 180 and he makes this concept album with Bob Ezrin as the producer. Now, Bob Ezrin is best known for his work on the early Alice Cooper group albums and Kiss's Destroyer. He also, I believe he produced The Wall too, if I'm not mistaken.
He produced The Wall. Yeah, he produced The Wall.
Yes, thank you for confirming that. His production on here is very lush. It's been described as grandiose. It certainly is. Fantastic musicians on here. I mean, You can't get much better talent than Ainsley Dunbar on drums, Jack
Christ.
Bruce on bass. You also have Tony Levin playing on a couple songs here. And for guitar, Lou Reed, as wonderful a guitar player as he was throughout his career, he sticks with acoustic on here. But instead, you got Dick Wagner and Richard Hunter, who would later play with Lou Reed on Rock and Roll Animal, and then he would join Alice Cooper's solo band for a number of years. Wonderful talents, both of them. How's the album? The album is very sad. It's about two junkies and what they go through during their life, and it gets sadder as it goes on. The album is not about the city of Berlin. Berlin, to Lou Reed, was a fractured city. So Berlin is the parallel to the fractured relationship between Caroline and Jim on the album. The playing on here is magnificent. A lot of orchestration and strings and woodwind instruments. It starts out with the title song, which was originally on the debut, but here it's just made into a piano song. And it goes into Lady Tay, which is about Caroline being a woman of the night, evening or the night. Men of Good Fortune is a wonderful song. It's been on the upbeat side, and then it goes into Caroline Says, which has a very whimsical feel. And from there, it kind of, the mood kind of goes down a little bit. How Do You Think It Feels is a fantastic track. The guitar playing on here is stunning. Lou Reed's vocals on here are awesome throughout. And then it goes into Oh Jim, which is really mellow. And then from here, Caroline Says Too is very sad. The kids is about when the authorities take the kids away from Caroline and Jim because of their horrible drug problems and their domestic issues as well. The Bed is even more verbose and sad. And that is when Jim finds that Caroline has committed suicide. In the end, it ends with Sad Song, where Jim is saying, I gotta stop wasting my time and move on with my life. The orchestration will make you cry. It's a wonderful way to end a fantastic album. And it is a sad album, but if you focus on the music, solely on the music, it'll take you to another place. How did the album sell? It bombed. In the States, went to number 98 after Transformer was probably Lou Reed's biggest selling album. Didn't garner any hits. Lou Reed wouldn't go to Berlin until over 30 years later, when he would play some shows playing this album in its entirety. For the longest time, he didn't want to hear the album or discuss it much. Another thing I read about this album was that there were parallels between what was going on in his life and the material here, because Lou had a big drug problem at the time. There were domestic issues between he and his wife at the time too. When I was reading that, I mean, it was disturbing to read, but it does. But having said that, wonderful album. Lou Reed, Berlin. It is an acquired taste, I will say that.
Now I gotta check it out.
No, that's a masterpiece. And I had the fortune to see Lou Reed play Berlin in its entirety in the State Theatre about 15 years ago. And at the end of the show, the audience did a standing ovation and Lou Reed was in tears. He was actually moved because this album flopped. And I think, I'm not sure if Metal Machine Music or some of the other albums that he did was in reaction to, the non-commercial success of it. But it certainly was a major disappointment for him. And he had to be coaxed through this particular curation to bring it back and do the show. And just to see Lou Reed play Berlin, that's definitely one for my memory bank forever.
Yeah.
But a wonderful album. And I remember just a little bit of a takeout. I was playing this while I was having dinner with my wife, and she had never heard this album before. And she said, "Oh, it's not a very happy album, is it?"
No, it's a fabulous album, but it's not one like I have to be in a good
In the mood
to
Yeah.
listen to it. If I'm
You do.
down and I listen to this album, it can actually make me spiral. So
Yeah.
It's sad though when you just quickly when you have an artist that works on a piece of work to such an extent that they want the masses to hear it, and they're so excited for it, and they this is what I'm going to present to you and you're going to love it, and you present it and they're like, it isn't your best, and then they start to spiral because they're like, they get so depressed that the mass audience doesn't accept it.
Yeah,
right?
you've hit it bang on, because I know it's a completely different genre. I did a show on John Sykes and the album Blue Murder, and that's a similar one. He put so much energy into that album and it flopped. And some people say he's never recovered since, and that's why he's in sort of incognito. So if you put everything into something and it gets rejected, well, yeah,
it's sad.
Yeah, absolutely. Peter Wicks, what have you got for your second pick?
All right. Well, there was a few I was choosing from. Someone mentioned Alice Cooper. There's a number of Alice Cooper albums you could choose for this. Also, Public Enemy, Fear of a Black Planet. You can't go without mentioning Green Day's American Idiot. I mean, that was a massive.
Yes.
As a
Great
album. The one I'm going to go for, though, is out of 1994. I think it's 1994. 9 Inch Nails, The Downward Spiral.
Wow, that's a great album.
So, we said earlier about follow-up theme albums never really hitting it. This album is sort of like, not so much of a follow-up, but it's a modern day, if you can call last century modern day, like a reworked version of Pink Floyd's The Wall. It's basically a rock star's spiral into self-abuse, and it ends in a similar way, in a similar remorseful way. So if you actually follow the path, it's very much like Pink Floyd The Wall, and not many people seem to have picked that up. But I did see someone in Spin magazine once pick that up, and Trent Reznor was kind of surprised and goes, not many people see the comparison between the two albums. Another obviously very dark album. It's extremely aggressive, but it goes through very melancholic pieces as well, which kind of like adds to it. It's like he kind of builds up to a period of aggression and then it just gets so aggressive, and then afterwards it's like he feels remorse and then self-pity and the last track, Hurt, is a fantastic track. Some of you might have heard the Johnny Cash cover of it. Rick Rubin got Johnny Cash to do a cover version of it, and it's an excellent cover. It's also a fantastic film clip. The Johnny Cash film clip is just amazing,
magnificent.
It's just it does put a whole new spin on the song without changing the lyrics too much. I mean, it takes out the Crown of Thorns, or there's one lyric that changes, which obviously Johnny Cash wasn't too comfortable with. But yeah, excellent album. The single Closer, I think it's ironically got there was a vote in Australia, the number one song to have sex to, and that won it.
And that got played on radio. Do you remember that Bicyclelegs? Did they play it up in Brisbane? That got played on commercial radio. That's just the most unlikely radio hit.
Yeah, and also it introduced industrial music to the masses. Really, it's I mean, I know there was other bands doing it previously, Ministry and the like, but it really put it on the map. And yeah, and Trent Reznor, as we know, he's gone on to win Grammys and Oscars and the only thing he's got to win now is a Tony, and he gets into that. So I don't know.
Yeah, he's got
to do a musical.
Club. Yeah.
So I can't go without mentioning, recorded in the Manson house, in the Sharon Tate's house.
I was going to say
videos. I mean, that goes to show how that's really symbolic of how dark an album it is.
The album is infamous for being recorded at the Polanski house on Cielo Drive. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. That's another album that's not terribly cheery, and kind of puts you on a bit of a spiral listening to it. But it's a great album. There's no doubt. So,
Closer was actually their most popular song in the States. You couldn't avoid that song back in the mid-90s. Closer by Nine Inch Nails.
Okay, yeah.
Closer got played heavy here.
Mm-hmm.
Morden had like a hold it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, guys. Well, I'll just finish up very briefly. I'll just put up the album cover. I think everybody knows this, and some of you guys have actually mentioned this artist.
Okay.
There you go.
I was going to pick that as it. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the. I think it's probably my second favorite Alice Cooper album. I'm always been a $1 Billion Babies fan, but that's my second favorite. What's the concept? It's loose. Nightmare of a child who happens to be called Stephen. And it's got some of Alice's biggest hits. Welcome to My Nightmare was a hit. Department of Youth was a huge hit. And even the deeper tracks like Cold Ethel, people know that. One of my favorite songs of the album is Only Women Bleed. And that was quite controversial in the day, but it's a feminist anthem. It's a very wonderful, touching, and probably one of Cooper's best vocal performances.
If I can make a recommendation, pick up "Welcome to My Nightmare" from 2011, the sequel.
Right, and that falls into the category of not being too bad.
It falls into the category of pretty good.
Okay,
it continues the story of Stephen.
Yeah, I'll check that out.
It's a more darker album.
Yeah, we'll do. Funny enough, John the Music Nut, that Alice stole the Lou Reed band from Berlin. So he had him, Dick Wagner, they were driving it, but he picked up the guitarist, bass player and drummer from Lou Reed band and recorded this over a few albums. It's got Vincent Price. It's iconic. It's got, this I think was voted one of the most iconic album covers of all time.
You have to wonder if Michael Jackson heard Vincent Price and made his decision.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
Yeah, I think there was a story about that, yeah.
It hit top 5 US, Australia top 5, and then the albums he did after that weren't so wonderful commercially or artistically. He went into his alcohol phase, and I think we know the rest of the story. But I think it's a blue chip Bob Ezra in production. What's that?
Crash was a bit of a comeback for him.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. But it begs the question, in terms of the concept of Welcome to My Nightmare. What if you couldn't wake up from your dreams? What if you were trapped in your dreams? What then? Right? That's the question throughout the entire album. Like both of them actually. So that's why you should pick up part 2. I think
I definitely will.
Now you've gotten all dark.
Well,
sorry.
Guys, thank you very much for this show. It's been fun. Even though the topic subject matter has been very dark, but I think it's been richly rewarding. And viewers, please check out some of these albums. I certainly will. Please like and subscribe to Rock Daydream Nation. Tell us your favorite concept albums, what your views on some of these albums that we've put forward. And gentlemen, thank you very much. Peter Wicks, Bicyclelegs, Armando Venditti, John the Music Nut. I'll put all the links. You can catch their shows. They've got wonderful content. And I'm sure we'll do a panel show very soon. Cheers.
Awesome.
See ya.
Bye.
Cheers.